all people are driving around with an Eat My Cookie sticker on the back of your car. Like they couldn't put it together.
Jess Meniere, storyteller and the founder of Bitchy Bites.
A South African biscuit shop.
She speaks about how failures can turn into your greatest success.
What's the benefit of actually trying many things?
Like how enriching and fulfilling is it to, choose one day to be an artist and choose one day to be a writer and choose one day to be a cook. Because I think if you focus singularly on one thing, the moment we take that away from you, you have the whole identity crisis.
How did you then decide to go and sell these cookies?
So a lot of places actually just said no, and then I was like, no guys, I'm done. Like this is not even fun anymore. I'm not having fun. And then my dad was like, no, you cannot stop. I was like, I'm not quitting. I cannot physically handle all of this.
So walk me through that creative process and how you come out with this cool.
Gosh,
Jess, you wear many hats. Which hat makes you feel most fulfilled?
Oh, that is a big question. I think I'm gonna choose like the umbrella hat of like creativity, and I think I allow that creativity to channel through the different things that I do. So yeah, can I pick that?
I definitely understand when you say you choose creativity.
Yeah.
What's the medium that you allow that creativity to flow into?
That's again another big question, but I think I allow that creativity to flow through my photography, being one of the things that I do work-wise, but also passion-wise. Then also writing through words, through work as well. I think that's definitely a big one. And then through food. I've actually struggled a lot this year to try and, when people ask like, what do you do, to give meaning or word to it or to make sense of it, because I love to take photographs and I take photographs for work. I love to write and I write, and then I am the founder and the brains behind Bitchy Bites, which is my cookie company, and that is like the food element of it. And not only do I have Bitchy Bites, it's kind of like this food business that I allow creativity to flow in, I think, and I mean creativity flowing through the food in the sense that like come up with recipes myself. There's a lot of playful marketing behind the brand as well. It's like loud and in your face and pink, and it says "Eat My Cookie" across all of the jars. So that is where I think express a lot of the creativity, but also in like the everyday kind of like feeding of and nourishing of my body. I love to play in the kitchen. I often say that I like procrastinate instead of procrastinating. I bake a lot, and yeah, it's just an off switch. If I've spent a crazy week or day just working or grafting, I completely switch off in the kitchen. I love playing and creating with recipes, like anything plant-based, and just trying to like reinvent the wheel in a way. So I think that's kind of where the creativity element comes in.
And when you're growing up, do you think that your early childhood environment was encouraging towards your creativity and to express yourself fully? Yeah,
definitely. I had a very unique and a very privileged upbringing. I have to kind of go in there with this disclosure. My mom is an artist, and I've got like early memories from her, putting out this red plastic table where she'd like put out like crayons and pens and papers, and we would always just make art, and it was always, like fun activity to paint and be creative, and then we actually traveled quite a bit when I was young. I was born in Joburg but left South Africa when I was 8, and then it became this like wild, international tour for good, how do I do the math? A good 10 years. So I moved countries every like 6 to 12 months. We did some time in Dallas, Texas, in the States. I lived in Singapore and Bangkok. I lived in like Peru and Morocco and India, Vancouver. So it was really an incredible, like childhood of traveling. And I fell into an expatriated community, which was also very unique in its own. So went into international schools and was in and out of international schools. But I think that element of travel like brought up a sense of like in curiosity and play in me as a child. And having again a mum who was very creative and an artist, and then my dad on the other side is he was in mobile banking, so very much so like the sales, mathematics, kind of like polar opposites. I think it was this beautiful balance of being able to like play and create, but also with like a logical side of like, okay, well, like what ultimately are we creating? Like what's the end goal here? So yeah, I think my childhood definitely did kind of like mold me in a way to like ask these big questions of like, what do you want to make? Or are we going to create something? Or what's the purpose of it? And like how are we going to do that? So yeah, again, just a very, very privileged, creative, playful, bold, colourful upbringing, which was wonderful.
And I think because you do a lot of things, a better question to ask is, do you think that you do a lot of things now because of that moving around from place to place, country to country? Do you feel like being or doing one thing is maybe restrictive?
Yes and no. It's a great question. I think a lot of the moving around has instilled a sense of like, curiosity and questioning of, home or something more. Like I feel like I'm constantly searching for something. And I don't necessarily know what it is. I think there's this unfulfilled sense of like needing to find whatever it is that I'm looking for. And I think that definitely does stem from kind of like this upbringing of travel and change and like new schools and new people and new friends. And I think I do bring that into my work. I'm constantly asking questions of like, well, what more? Like there's got to, like how can I do it differently? And but in the same breath, I also do believe that if you do one thing, you can do it really well. And instead of sticking your fingers into many pies, like focusing on one pie and making it perfect is probably better. My mom has also always kind of told me that, and she's always just been like, rather than spreading yourself so thin, like focus on one thing and like refine it and be good at it, and then maybe move on. And I mean, I always say, like, Mom, that's very humble coming from you, because she now works also a full-time job and is still doing her art on the side and is still starting another business, and I'm just like, I'm like the your clone. But yeah, like they say master of, what does it say? Like there's a quote that something along those lines.
Yeah,
Jack of all trades, master of none. So yeah, sometimes I do have to try and remind myself that, like, instead of trying to do everything, rather just try and focus on one thing.
But what's the benefit of actually trying many things, specifically from an early age and even early 20s?
I do think that it provides you with a lot of opportunity and choice, and I think that's a really great thing, to be able to like try lots of things and maybe realize, actually, I'm not really great at this, but I've also tried this at the same time, so maybe I can pivot quite easily from doing this thing to the next thing. Like an example of, we'll use sports as an example, but say you start soccer as a kid but don't really enjoy it, but also running track and field and enjoy that, like the transition is fairly easy. You just stop the one sport and continue with the other. And I think by allowing yourself to do many things, even if you kind of never become an expert at that, like how enriching and fulfilling is it to, choose one day to be an artist, and choose one day to be a writer, and choose one day to be a cook, to have the means to explore and keep exploring without an element of like, oh, what happens if, you fail? Because you're so used to maybe trying different things or being mediocre at different things. I think that's a really great opportunity. I've got a friend who I use as an inspiration. I think I'm busy, but when I look at her, I'm just like, I have no idea how you manage your life. But she makes clothes. She is a private chef. She is a business advisor. She also trains people's staff so that they can work in the kitchen. And I look at her and I'm just like, how do you manage it all? And she always just says like she wouldn't have her life any other way. And she's made friends with the idea of failing and starting again and trying something new. And I definitely do think that comes from a place of being busy and doing many things. Because I think if you focus singularly on one thing, the moment we take that away from you, you have a whole identity crisis of like, well, the one thing that I do or I am good at, I can no longer do. So yeah, there is benefit in it.
How do we get okay with failing?
I'm not there yet, so maybe I'm not great to answer on that front, but I will kind of maybe bring in the story of how Bitchy Bites started. And I think not many people know this, but Bitchy Bites basically started, it was born out of failure. And yeah, I was, I think, passionate and like probably a little bit high on some like pipeline dream of becoming a pro trail runner. I absolutely love trail running, and I just thought that, you know, with a coach and adequate training and a lot of dedication, that maybe I would eventually kind of get somewhere to the top of the podium. But I ended up like fracturing my back and my hip, and was very much so sidelined from all exercise for a good 6 months. And I think I drove my family nuts in those 6 months, but I basically, as I said earlier, kind of channeled my love into procrastinating or baking, and that's how Bitchy Bites came about. And it was born out of the failure of not being able to strive for this, you know, pipeline dream of, you know, being a pro runner, and basically took that into focusing more and spending more time in the kitchen and baking. And yeah, so I think it's also, you know, reframing your mindset about like what failure is. And I think, you know, allowing yourself to be upset when you do fail, but then also choosing to not wallow in that, you know, disappointment, and rather using it as an opportunity to like refocus and kind of rewrite the narrative. I still, like, as I said, I still really do struggle with failure. And I think each time you do fail, you become a little bit better at it, and you learn how to kind of navigate situations, you know, for it. But yeah, it's definitely a hard pill to swallow.
What I also noticed is that it's a lot to do with perception and how other people perceive you.
Yeah.
I think a lot of where our hesitation to try many things and do many things comes from, oh, what will other people think when this fails, or my family, or, you know, even loved ones. I think for me, that's what I noticed specifically was, how do I push past what other people think and do this because I feel that this is the right thing to do? Or if it does fail, cool, like you said, don't perceive it as the end. Bounce back on it.
Yeah, and it's, you know, you're so like right in saying that. I think we get so fixated on like the perception of what people think of us. But I often think that like the more you speak about it, the more you also have an opportunity to share your experience about that failure. More people like empathize with you or respect you for it. You know, I think you almost eliminate that judgment and that space for people to criticize you or think what they may think of you by actually stepping in and being like, well, this is the story and this is what happened. And I've at least learned that in my experience. I think like there have been times when I failed and I'd be like, oh my God, like what are people going to think about me? And instead of like, you know, keeping it to myself or like, you know, almost overthinking my own way, being like, oh, they're going to think this and that and this. It's like you almost kind of, you know, skip a few steps and just say like upfront, like this is the story and this is what actually happened.
Definitely.
Yeah, and it creates a better narrative, and I think it also makes you feel better about yourself as well, because you share your story instead of allowing them to create their own story, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, being vulnerable and meeting that person where they are. You mentioned starting Bitchy Bites and that story. So cool, you essentially had this injury and then went on to, by mistake, make these amazing cookies. How did you then decide to go and sell these cookies?
So I actually do have to give a lot of credit to a couple of my friends. I dropped them off with some of them just kind of as like a post-serve, like here's a bunch of biscuits. I can't physically eat another 20 of these because I've, you know, consumed my body weight in biscuits. And they're all like, these are insane. Like, not only are they vegan and gluten-free and refined sugar-free, but they taste great. And I think that was kind of where people were just like, you have to do something with these. And they were, after, you know, trying a few, individually ordering them from me. And they were like, no, we need like a box of 20. And yeah, I had a friend, I don't know if you know Carl Davies, he was a part of that Albert band. He was like one of the OG tasters of these cookies, and I think he ate like 10 in a sitting. It was like, okay, we've got a problem. And his girlfriend can out-eat him in cookies now today. Like, it's such a laugh. But it started really much so like a very small scale, individualized order, and then I luckily, you know, I think it's luck, but I think again it's also saying yes to opportunity. I was lucky to have a friend that worked in like a manager of a restaurant called Salt, and they were the first stockers, and he asked me, he was just like, we love your cookies, or I love your cookies. I'm going to put them forward on the, morning coffee croissant tray. Can we have a jar of 25? So it was really just like that opportunity that I got handed to be like, would you say yes to this? And I did, and I was like, I'd love for store to sell the cookies. I didn't really know much about kind of like the wholesale, like how am I going to price my cookies, and that was all like a learning curve. And then from there, it just kind of took off, with Salt then stocking the biscuits. Goodridden started stocking the biscuits, and then it was like 2 cafes to 5 cafes to now 20 cafes. So it did have this snowball effect, but again, like I think, having that opportunity of being like, we want you to stock us, can you meet these order quantities? And then, maintaining that had really kind of paved the way forward to then, have more cafes reach out and be like, oh,
wow.
Can you stock us?
And so, are you saying that it just grew word of mouth to more
It
cafes?
did grow word of mouth. I did try and like drop off samples at like some cafes as well. So I think when I was at about 5 cafes, I was just like, what I need to do is I actually need to go and make like boxes of biscuits and have my stickers on them and hand them out to cafes with my details and like a wholesale document that I'd like printed out, like the very initial kind of like grassroots days. And a lot of places actually just said no, because a lot of them do actually do all their baking inside or in-house, and like, they're quite, adamant on keeping it that way. And then some people said yes, and that was really what was like cool and exciting about this. And I think, when it came to like the initial growing stages, I was lucky that I was like injured at the time, and I had like all this extra time on my hands, but I was also studying. So I was studying and then also freelancing for a company, doing like writing pieces for them and articles for them and helping with on-event kind of photography. So it was a little bit of a juggle of realizing, okay, now I've got 3 to 4 hours of my day where I need to be making like 200 cookies, like how are we going to do this? And I think in having so much already on my plate, it forced me to streamline the system of the business of like, okay, there has to be designated bake days and there has to be a designated delivery day, because I can't spend my university hours, driving around Cape Town dropping off cookies. This is just like, I need to get through my degree as well. So I think the busyness of my schedule almost allowed and forced me to sit down and like be like, okay, cool, we're going to bake on a Wednesday and we're going to deliver on a Thursday. And it systematized, the actual like initial structure of Bitchy Bites as a business. And again, it made me ask the question of like, cool, if you are going to do this, how are you going to do this? There was still an element of like creativity and play, but there was like my dad, the logical side of like, okay, well, you need to have like a structure to it, and
how did you figure out that back end business stuff, the legal?
I have to like definitely give my family a lot of credit here. There were many times where I'm like, I'm so done with Bitchy Bites. I'm done. I think my brother baked for probably like 4 months, and people don't even know this. My poor brother, I think he was like, he just finished and matriculated high school and had like a couple months before starting at Stellenbosch, and I was like, just in like a beginning, I think my final year for writing exams or whatever it was, I was like, there's no ways I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was crazy. So my brother baked for 4 months and he delivered biscuits. And then I was like, no guys, I'm done. Like, this is not even fun anymore. I'm not having fun. And then my dad is also French. He's very French. And he was like, no, you cannot stop. Are you quitting? You can't quit. I was like, I'm not quitting. I cannot physically handle all of this. So my family were incredible, and like my dad taught me how to not that I didn't know how to use a Google spreadsheet beforehand, but he just taught me how to systematize it. And I've still got the same order spreadsheet from when I started back in 2020 to now. So it's a backlog of like each cookie that was sold, who had paid. I know people that still haven't paid from 2020, like I've got them on my system being like, you actually owe me some money. But yeah, he helped with like the mothership of this order spreadsheet that I have. As I said, my brother was very involved with like the actual baking himself during a point, and I think my mom was also just this incredible like sounding board of like, okay, you can get through these mental breakdowns if the small business is causing you, but like, she'd often say like, you know how Steve Jobs started, And I was like, yes, but I'm not Steve Jobs, Mom. Like, she's just like, you go out there and you sell your cookies, So yeah, I think it was, and I come back to this idea of like being kind of privileged and supported in that by my family. And I mean, my parents also opened up their like oven for me in the initial, stages of like, okay, now I'm using your oven. And it was a full kitchen takeover. There wasn't like cool, I'm baking just 20 biscuits. It's like, no, I'm baking from 7 a.m. in the morning to 11 p.m. in the evening, and no one can come into the kitchen, not even the dog, because there can't be a dog hair in any of these biscuits. So yeah, it luckily has evolved from that. It's no longer as crazy or chaotic, and I do have my own kitchen now. So, but yeah, it definitely came from a lot of like, you know, great minds and helping hands to kind of get it to a point where it is now.
Also, what I'm hearing is that you just went for it.
Yeah.
But you were resourceful. You reached out to, you were using your family's kitchen, and besides from just going with it, being resourceful, you also supported yourself and had a support system around you, and individuals that really backed you. Apart from what you were doing, it was like, no, we back you. You can do this. And I think those 3 key things it sounded like really instrumental in your early growth. What other challenges did you have early on?
Oh gosh, so many. So I got to a point where my brother was like, I'm not going to be baking for you anymore because he needed to start university. And it was like, okay, well, I'm now also going to be moving from university, like schedule hours to like a full-time job. So I was like, I need to employ someone. So my initial employee, recruitment stages, I upskilled 2 people who, after like a week of training, like day-to-day training, I was like, I'm confident that this is not going to work. They made about 500 cookies with no coconut sugar. So I had lost probably like 8,000 Rand worth of stock and time and energy. And that was just like the start of like, training someone up to employ them. And from there, it was also just a roller coaster. I am very lucky to have a baker now who is incredible. We occasionally do have like stock issues where, he wouldn't have done the stock recall, and then he rocks up on a baking day and is like, oh, we don't have any coconut sugar but have 1,000 biscuits to bake. And I'm like, Lester, we were here 4 months ago and I asked you, please, like, can we not do this? But it's also just a matter of like, owning your own business. You're gonna, come across these little speed bumps in the road or potholes or whatever it is. So yeah, in the initial days when I first was like training someone else up, it was really difficult. And it got to the point where like I trained someone up, didn't work, and I was just like, you know what, I'm not really great at delegating. And I think that's kind of been the biggest obstacle in this Bitchy Bites journey is I'm used to a standard, and I want to continue to put out a standard of like high quality, and I don't want anything less than that. And I think that's what I really did struggle with in that like handover process of making someone else kind of the baker. Was I know what a cookie should look like, I know what it should taste like, I know what it like, what needs to go into it. And it was such a difficult thing to be like, now I'm trusting you because I've taught you how to do this, to do it correctly. I think that's what's really hard. And it got to the point where like after even training someone, I was like, you know what, I'm actually just gonna keep baking these biscuits. And when I was working full time, I was working a 9 to 5. I like lived in Muizenberg, but I was working in town. So it's like an hour drive to town. So I'd wake up at like 2 in the morning, bake dough, then get in my car, drive to work, drive back from work, and then roll out the dough, bake all these cookies, wait for them to dry, and then wake up the next morning, stack all the jars. And then it was just like, a complete insanity. Anyone from the outside would be like, what are you doing? This is so not okay. And at the end of the day, you're compromising the actual quality of your biscuit, by choosing not to let go and choosing not to upskill yourself with a team. You're doing yourself and your business a disservice. So coming to that realization was huge. And it has been so wonderful to have Lester, who does bake for me now, to just step in, and it was like honestly effortless. I think I taught him twice, and it's got to the point where we actually joke that he makes the biscuits better than I do, because he can come into a kitchen and he can bake 500 biscuits from like 8 in the morning to 12, and he'll be done. And I'm like, well, how is this one single man literally, pumping out biscuits, which is amazing. Again, I think just making sure you surround yourself with a team is really important, and learning to delegate.
Yeah, and also what I'm hearing from that is getting out their way.
Yeah.
And ensuring, of course, recruitment is good, then recruitment is good, training has to be good, cool, training is good, systems and processes have to be good. Yeah. But then it's like letting them do their thing. And I think I liked what you mentioned about, you're actually jeopardizing the quality of, for example, in your case, the product. If you continue to do that, because you're tired, you're coming home, there's going to be slip-ups.
Yeah.
Yes. And so letting someone else handle that, I think that's a good, it takes a lot to get to that point, but once you do and once you go over, I mean, I'm sure.
And it also prevents you from growing. Ultimately, if you are holding on to your business and you're not willing to let anyone else in, you're not, you singularly can't take it further. You can go fast alone, but you can't go far.
Yeah.
If you want to go far, you need a team behind you.
You're working in the business as opposed to on the business.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Definitely. And I noticed that, I love your marketing. So walk me through that creative process of how you come up with these cool.
Gosh, so I love puns.
Okay.
I know it's like really, and people say things and they're just like, why did you say that? Like, it's just ridiculous. So a lot of like the initial kind of, how I was going to market the cookies, it came from a place of actually like being quite like a bit of a prude and very PC and like a little bit uptight, and like people, like we as a family, like I've never been able to say it. Like we openly talk about like sex and all these things, but I've never been able to say it. We always say like sex, So there's always been, in my friends know that there's always been this like element of like quite like conservativeness to me, even though I'm not. It's just like I've always had this kind of like, oh, okay, cool, please don't hug me too long or anything like that. So I thought it'd be quite funny, in a way, to come up with these cookies that are so different to my persona, like the antithesis of me, and the whole eat my cookie thing, and like so it'll make you crumb. It was supposed to be shockworthy, and it really was, and it really worked. And people were in stitches. They were just like, I cannot believe you of all people are driving around with an eat my cookie sticker on the back of your car. Like they couldn't put it together. And also, as a vegan biscuit, vegans have such a bad rep. So a lot of the thinking behind this was to actually take, this bad rep of vegans being like super uptight and being like, oh wow, gosh, they're vegan, shame, so irritating, so dry. Like it was actually to bring a bit of like humor to this like bad vegan stereotype. And just be a little bit more like in your face about it, like, yes, okay, cool, eat my cookie, like we're vegans, it's supposed to scream it to you a little bit like that.
So the last bit of the podcast, I like to ask these fast fire questions where if you could answer in a word, a sentence, that would be amazing. What astonishes me or what surprises me about you is that you're only 22, right? 23, sorry, and you are doing the most, which is amazing. What is the best piece of advice that you've received thus far?
Keep going. I won't explain that, but just, keep going.
I like it. Powerful.
Yeah.
And the worst piece of advice?
I have to explain this. I'm not going to say who said it, but I think saying stick with you is something that someone will say to you will stick with you for a long time. But the worst piece of advice I've ever received is the advice that like, you are only as great as your next achievement. And I think while that is powerful and it can be profound, it can also hold people back, and it can also like lead them to feel insignificant. And I think we also don't allow ourselves to celebrate things. When you achieve something, celebrate it. Stop, recognize, know that what you've done is amazing. Go eat a flippin' piece of cake and drink a glass of champagne and celebrate that moment instead of finishing and then like worrying about what next it is that you're going to achieve. I think I've spent a lot of my life striving for things, achieving them, and then moving on to the next thing. And I'm learning now to actually stop, realize, recognize what it is that I've done, and honor that.
What was that switch for you?
Ooh. That switch for me, I think, has actually really been this year. The reason being, I feel like I haven't achieved a lot this year. And I have achieved things that have been small. They haven't been like, kind of milestone achievements. They haven't been like degrees. It hasn't been anything that's huge or that you can put onto a piece of paper. And I think in realizing why I felt like I hadn't achieved a lot, it was like, oh, actually, you know what? Like, I need to focus on this, even if they're small achievements. I need to stop and focus and recognize these small achievements and these small wins. because otherwise there's this feeling of like constantly not being good enough that you continue to feed and grow. So yeah, I think I'm still in that phase of like learning to stop and like recognize my achievements. So I think that's kind of, it's this current phase. I'm still in it.
Yeah.
But it has been this year where I've realized that.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, I also struggle with always wanting to do more, achieve more, be more. And of course it comes from childhood of having to achieve and get the best results. And of course that plays out in your adult life. But it is difficult to slow down and to acknowledge, okay, cool, I've just climbed this mountain. Yes, there's other mountains, but like maybe just enjoy the view for now. So I definitely feel that it's challenging to just slow down. And for me, I think it was surrounding myself with those individuals that were like, actually, just look, you're doing a good job. And that positive reinforcement into my life, that helps me to switch and be like, cool, keep going. But
it's so difficult, and I really do think like the more you do it, the more you practice it, the easier it does become. I don't know if it'll ever be like super easy to do. I think also just wired from a conditioning of upbringing to want and expect and be busy and do more. But I do think you can kind of learn to also just be so content and like, actually, it's important to know that I'm here.
I think there is a fine balance between it, because I mean, it sounds like you are super ambitious. So having this drive, this ambition, while acknowledging, cool, you are doing enough towards that bigger goal or dream, while not being complacent.
Yes.
There's a fine line.
You're so right. But I think you're also speaking from experience.
It's a lot of individuals now. There's this thing about, oh, you are enough and you're doing enough, just be okay. But there is a fine line between that and actually not actually achieving not living up to your potential. I think that's a good way to put it.
I think you're so right, and I think as well, like, you also, if you become too complacent, then you also miss opportunities. So that's the thing. It's like you can't just, like, you have to stop, recognize, take some time to soak in your achievement, and then also, like, in a way, use it to keep driving forward into the next thing.
The progress and momentum. Definitely.
So otherwise, there's no momentum.
But yes, thank you, Jess. This was very insightful. Thank you for your words of wisdom and just sharing your story with us.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Cool.
Really awesome.
Thank you.